Good morning. This is Playing to Win with me, Mark Henderson Leary, and my good friend Brad Freyer. How are you this morning, sir?
Fantastic, man. How are you?
I'm really, really well. I guess it's summer. COVID ended last week, which is wonderful here in Texas. The rest of the country, I feel bad for you, but we got it knocked out. Moving on, and summer's here.
So,
After Ice Apocalypse.
I don't think. I mean, summer's not officially here. Don't do that to me.
No, actually, technically, the 20th is the beginning of spring. So
Okay.
no. But,
Yeah, don't ruin my favorite season. Spring is just. I love spring.
Yeah, both weeks of it, or just like
Yeah, yeah. Last year it seemed like we had a really long extended spring. Thankfully, because that was the beginning of the lockdown. But I'm hoping we get to enjoy a little bit of spring this year as well.
You see, I do remember spring break. I took almost all of March off because of planning for spring break, and then the pandemic hit, which meant everything stopped. So I had like 2 solid months of no work, not making money. So I have an awful lot of faith. It was a very, very unnerving time there for a minute. I had strategically planned that. So like, there will be money again one day. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Eventually there was, so we were okay, but scary. Yeah, so it's spring again. Things are the birds are tweeting, and the plants are starting to grow little green buds on the otherwise decimated brownness. I do my tree in the back completely brown. I'm praying for it every day. The asparagus ferns, the foxtail ferns, those are actually doing a little bit though. So it looks like those are going to come back.
Yeah, I mean my evergreen stuff is looking good, but everything else is annihilated. And
so, on that subject, that flows us directly into transactional analysis.
Does it now? I'd like to see how that works out. How do you?
Very logical. Well, as a wounded child plant, and me as being a healthy, I don't know. This is your subject, man. I want to mess the terminology up. We've promised our listeners transactional analysis discussion for like over a month in between your vacation and East Apocalypse. That didn't go off as scheduled, but it's a fantastic subject. The idea of some of the familiar roles that we have been in throughout our lives, and ways to kind of unpack how we might be replaying patterns that aren't serving us. Is that a fair way to describe some of that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, transactional analysis is one of my favorite topics. It's basically understanding human interaction, right? What drives how we communicate and what drives how we receive the messages that are being given to us. And so when you look at the way in which we communicate, it typically falls into 3 buckets. And you know this as well as anybody. It's the parent, the adult, and the child. The parent ego state is all those recordings that we have from childhood of how parents behave, right? How do you in an authoritative position, how do you behave? How do you communicate? How do you respond to circumstances? And it typically falls into one of 2 buckets, right? You've got the critical parent or the nurturing parent. The critical parent, all those recordings playing in our head of a person of authority wagging their finger at us, right? How many times have I told you not to do that? Go pick up your shoes. Hey, don't do this, do that. That's the critical parent. And some of us grew up with a lot of critical parent messaging. And so because we had so much critical parent messaging, we tend to communicate from a critical parent standpoint.
Yeah, it's the toolbox we were given. We know those tools. They're familiar with us. So,
100%. The other bucket is the nurturing parent, right? And the nurturing parent is all those recordings that we have of a person of authority nurturing, encouraging, and supporting us, right? Oh, you're wonderful. You can accomplish anything. You skin your knee, they're holding you. I got you. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. Let's go patch that up. But all of that nurturing and support. Some of us grew up in a very nurturing environment. And so we have a very strong nurturing parent. So that's the parent. And the parent typically is communicating when we're in positions of authority. Right. And so that's when those recordings come out of us. And that's when we replay all those records that we have and we echo what we were trained.
So this mode just kind of comes on. We're not consciously thinking of this, but in certain circumstances, we sense the importance and authority placed upon us, and when we reach into intuitively to the toolbox, the behaviors, that's where we go. And it's not we might immediately think of ourselves as leaders and think about the latest book we read about Colin Powell or whomever we respect, but in truth, we're more likely to pull out of the toolbox things we learned decades ago. Relentlessly, or at least maybe not relentlessly, but certainly consistently reinforced for many, many years to teach us those habits.
Yeah, unless you have been consciously reprogramming your hard drive, you're going to have a triggered response based on circumstances and based on the recordings that you received as a child. So it's learned. It's very learned, but it is not unlearnable. We can unlearn it, and we can reprogram it. Totally. And awareness is the first key, because the parent, whether it's critical parent or nurturing parent, there are times when both of those ego states are productive, right? The critical parent is probably one of the least productive communicating states that you can be in, because it creates conflict, it creates bad will. But sometimes, as a person of authority, you have to drop the hammer. You have to wag the finger. You have to let people know it's real, it's serious. The nurturing parent is one that should be used a lot, right? It should be, if you're a leader, you should be using nurturing parent. If you're an actual parent, you should be nurturing your children. But the ego state, the next ego state that oftentimes is where we should be communicating from more than any other, is the adult ego state. The adult ego state is all the recordings and messages that we have in our head of what does an emotionally neutral, fact-based, intellectual conversation sound like? Right.
So is there a rationality that's tied to that? Is that how would you characterize that?
What do you mean rationality?
Is it like when you think of the parent, there's an emotional need to care and take care. The parent, the adult sounds like it's more like we're going to lean on logic. We're going to lean on rationality, and the emotional state is low.
Correct. And that's the word. The word is emotion. With parent has emotion attached to it. Parent has either, I want to say angry emotion from the critical parent, but it's a ramped up emotion. How many times have I told you don't do that? If I have to say it one more time, it's just that.
My term, and they're not psychological terms, or those are the outward emotions. Those are the energetic emotions, secondary emotions like anger, frustration, disappointment, or like anything that has energy to it that often comes from, disappointment can kind of be a primary and quiet one. But like if we're fearful, if we're very, very sad, and for a long period of time, it can turn into a very kinetic, outward facing energy.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the piece that's typically missing from the adult is emotion. Adult is unemotional, fact-based, hey, just the facts, man. But when you're having an adult-to-adult conversation, it's the most productive kind of conversations you can have, because it's rational, it's unemotional, it's intellectual, it's fact-based, and it's you can get a lot of productivity in that ego state. And ideally, most of our interactions with people are going to be adult to adult, right? That means we're having a meaningful conversation. It's I'm hearing you because it's not being obscured by my emotion. You're hearing me because it's not being obscured by your emotion. And so we're having meaningful dialogue. The third ego state is the child ego state. And the child ego state has a couple embedded in it, right? It's got the rebellious child. The rebellious child is that kid that, when you go to the grocery store and you hear the kid screaming and throwing a temper tantrum because they didn't get what they wanted at the grocery store. That's the rebellious child, right? They throw fits. They're upset because they're trying to manipulate the circumstances to get what they want. There's the natural child. The natural child prime example, how many videos did you see posted over Snowmageddon of grown ass people going outside and playing in the snow?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the natural. I just want to have fun. I just want to go do stuff that makes me happy. And that's the natural child. Right. And then there's a little professor. And the little professor is that conniving little person that goes to mom and says, "Mom, can I have some candy?" Mom says no. Little professor has figured out how to work the system and goes to dad and says, "Dad, can I have candy?" And of course, dad says, "What did mom say?" Well, mom said to ask you. I don't care. Go get what you want. And so little professor kind of figures out how to work the system. So what is most important with transactional analysis is knowing that if Mark Henderson Leary and Brad Freyer are having an exchange, Mark has a parent, adult, and a child inside of him, and I have a parent, an adult, and a child inside of me. And what's important is to understand which ones communicate most effectively, right? We've already established that adult to adult is primary. If you can have an adult to adult conversation, that's primo. But what happens when emotions get involved, right? What happens if I screw up and Mark gets upset and comes to me and says, "Brad, how many times have I said, don't talk about this topic on the live stream?" Well, that's very clearly a critical parent, right? And so he's wagging his finger. Now, while he's wagging his finger, what happens inside of me? Well, what happens inside of me is his finger wagging creates the ego state that I'm going to respond from.
And I'm guessing that if that's familiar and I'm not conscious of what's going on, I'm going to put myself into some form of child state that might be however I reacted as a child, depending on how significant I consider that other person. So if it's a prospect that's like a small deal and this person wags their finger at me, I'm like, this is wasting my time. I hang up the phone. If this is my biggest deal and this is my career maker, the threat value of that customer could put me into a state of something that brings me back to my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, I'll give a very short, the story's longer, but I'll give a brief synopsis of the story. When my oldest child was probably 5 or 6, I was in my living room and saw her name etched on our piano bench. And of course, my first reaction was critical parent, right? "Kennedy Nicole Freyer, where the hell are you?" And I hear her sprinting upstairs because she's in fear of her life now, slamming her bedroom door. So I now know where she is. But I run up there, I fling open the door, and I say, "Child, what are you thinking etching your name on the piano bench?" She goes into rebellious child because she's being attacked by the critical parent. So what do you think she said as a rebellious child to someone attacking her and making accusations? What do you think? What came out naturally?
It wasn't me.
Bingo! That's exactly right. It wasn't me, Dad. What? You telling me that someone broke into our house, etched your name and your crappy handwriting on our piano bench and escaped undetected? Wasn't me, Dad. Right? She didn't think about, what do I say? Okay, my dad's running upstairs. He's upset about something. Okay, Kennedy, get your story straight. That's not what she did. She reacted.
Get your story straight. Rehearse in the mirror.
Rehearse. Yeah.
Hold the line. Okay. Don't break character. Too much on the line.
She had a visceral reaction that is programmed from birth, right? That when attacked, create a barrier, right? Buy time, go defensive. In the professional world, if you're a leader of an organization and you go critical parent on an employee, Mark, man, how many times have I told you have to put a TPS, you have to put a cover sheet on your TPS report. If I come into your office and I'm wagging my finger, you're a grown man with grown children, but you're still going to say, well, I don't know that you gave me that note. I don't know that I ever saw that memo. I put a TPS report on it. I mean, I put a cover sheet on our TPS report. I mean, you're going to go into that because my critical parent is going to elicit a child response from you, right? Not literal, like a little baby goo goo gaga child response,
sure.
but a child ego response, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying to unpack for myself. Like it's just between you and me, right? No one's gonna hear this.
Yeah. Right.
So I can imagine because of my own responses. I know I don't deflect that way. I do attack back, and I do.
Rebellious child once again is
Rebellious child
is going to high emotion.
Well, so and I mean, think a little professor. I guess you say little professor is manipulative. I don't feel like I'm manipulative, but when I kind of gained a reputation when those very aggressive leaders would come at me and come to the room, and the room would feel kind of overwhelmed by this critical parent leader. Like I could step up into the middle of the room and push them back with all the facts, all the details, and like the room was sort of like rooting me on, like go go go. It was like gladiators or something like that. And actually, it was a terrible habit, and it turned me into a very hard edged leader that I had to unwind, that I'm still working on. But so I don't know if that's just rebellious child or if that's critical parent. Maybe it's critical parent against critical parent. Because I guess we've all, but if we've got kids, we've been to the ball game, right? Two critical parents on the field, and that's a whole other brawl.
Yeah, I mean, well, because little professor could be, you're trying to get your way, right? So little professor could be who you were coming from in that space with, I'll show you. And so if you had and this is theoretical, I'm assuming, but you have a conference room of people. A hard-charging type A personality comes in, makes accusations. You stand up as the spokesperson for the meek and timid, and you stand your ground. That would kind of be considered that little professor, because what's that leader, that's that critical leader, going to do in front of all these people? If you stand up, you're fact-based, and they're all going, ooh, what are they going to do? So you understood the dynamic of the circumstances and manipulated it to your advantage, right? Because you had all these people who knew the facts, who knew reality, and were going to basically support and get behind you. And so you're doing one of these afterwards.
I don't know. It's possible. It's very possible, because I remember the first couple times I did that, and this is a long.
Did you black out afterwards? You don't remember?
This was a long time ago, because what I learned is that rapid fire response is not a trust building activity for your team. And so I spent the last 2 decades trying to unwind that skill I developed under fire, because it was practical in trying to fend off an attack the team that couldn't defend from. But when I was leading the team, it just totally squelched feedback, and people didn't want to contribute because they felt like they had their ideas thrown back in their face by too much of a harsh response. So that was a long time. But I do remember kind of feeling like I was a little bit under attack. And then
if you were doing it to your team, you were a critical parent.
For sure. And I must confess, I find myself in critical parent a lot more than I would like, for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, because I think in the professional setting, I probably historically have been more critical parent probably more than I needed to be. In my household with my kids, I'm probably more nurturing parent. I mean, my wife calls me the child whisperer all the time, because I understand I've got 2 daughters, 2 teenage daughters. And so what I know is that when emotion is involved in the interaction, productivity ceases to exist, right? If you have an emotionally charged situation, for instance, I have a daughter who's come home. She did poorly on a test, and so she's very upset, very distraught. She's crying. She's self-loathing. Oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe it. Nothing I say in that circumstance is going to be productive or helpful, right? I can be a nurturing parent, which is great. babe, you're not an idiot. You're smart. I'm sure you tried, but it's still not going to land, because when we have emotion, nothing makes sense, right? The best way to prove this out: have you ever been in a true argument with someone, and in the middle of the argument, they stopped and said, "You know what, Mark? God, I think you're right." No, it's never happened, and it will never happen, because in the heat of an argument, emotions are raging, and so you're entrenched. You're focused on your perspective, on your argument. But what does happen? You have an argument. You go to your separate corners. The next day, what happens?
There's
emotions have
you unpack it, and people, you're right about this, and
bingo.
I'll challenge that a tiny bit, and because having worked with a lot of leadership team dynamics, there is healthy conflict that is differentiated in one way, and it's a subtle way, it's a powerful way, and it's hard to encounter, and you'll know it. And that is, if you're fighting for who's right, what you described is what happens. Like the only thing that matters is winning and losing, and those arguments are spousal arguments, partner arguments in business, where the emotions of rightness and wrongness are driven. There is a healthy team dynamic when people do care more about what's right than who's right, and the emotions can be high. And if the adversary is seen as the problem, I do see dynamics where people say, "Oh, damn it, you're absolutely right." Now, and you can really see that happen when it's not two people fighting each other; it's two people fighting a dragon together. And I think that's, I hate to say this, but I think that's more practical in a work world where the existential nature of being right or wrong is a little lower sometimes. And like in a close personal relationship, it's much harder to sort of say, like, we're collaborating against a common enemy here. It's more like, no, I'm right.
Yeah, but also in the work world, I would say, is probably not as much true emotion.
Yeah, for sure.
As much as it is an intellectual exercise. Right? When you're trying to battle an existential external dragon.
The emotion is tied to different things. It's tied to the pursuit of learning, it's the pursuit of solving the problem, it's the pursuit of the mission we're after together, as opposed to. Oftentimes the teams I try to facilitate, I'm facilitating them, right? We have a map on the wall, oftentimes, of exactly what the mission is, and so we're really clear on that. And I think that in between interaction, and I think this is a very, very important point, I think, and that is, you're likely to get stuck in that trap that you just said if you don't know what you're there for. And most of the time we don't. Most of the time, if it's a spousal fight, you walk in the door, you're setting a bag of groceries down, and suddenly you're going to fight. Like, no one knows why, no one knows how we got there, and so the idea of having some tethering to, like, the purpose, like, let's pull out our mission statement, honey. Let's talk about what are we working towards in the moment. You are absolutely right. Let's make that change. That's not going to happen. It's
Well, but what you have to even do prior to that is to be able to identify and recognize when emotion has been introduced to an environment. And in my house, whether it's the kids or spouse or whatever, as soon as we recognize emotions are involved, we call a timeout. Right? Yeah. Because whatever's going to happen after emotion is introduced into the conversation is going to be unproductive. You're not going to solve the problem. You're probably going to create more conflict because someone's going to say something emotionally charged that's going to escalate it. And so, like, especially when my kids were younger, now we have good habits and good communication routines. But when my kids were younger, if they started getting upset, angry, sad, whatever, crying, bawling, we would just send them to their room and say, "Hey, go to your room, cry it out. As soon as you're ready to talk, holler down, we'll come up and we'll have a conversation." And so a couple of things happen, right? Number one is they get the emotion out. But whenever they say, "Okay, I'm ready to talk," they've made the mental switch from rebellious child rebellious child into the adult, because they've said, "I'm ready to talk." And so they acknowledge that emotions are done. I'm ready to be engaged and focused. And the business world isn't much different. When, as a leader specifically, you have to recognize what triggers you, right? I know what triggers me. When people make excuses, it triggers me. And, I'll either go full critical parent or passive aggressive parent because excuses trigger me. Oh, I didn't have time to do that. Or, I thought I already sent that to you. Well, let me go back. Bullshit. Don't give me that. Just be honest with me, right? And in fact, I have a rule, and specifically at the manufacturing company, I always had a rule. I said, look, don't lie to me about why you don't come to work. If you need a day off because you're just burnt out, don't call and say that you have fever or you have a cough. Just say, hey, you know what? I needed a mental day. I needed a mental health day. I'm just burnt out. I want a day. Just be honest with me, right? If you're late, don't tell me you had car problems. Just tell me you overslept, right? Because I know when you're lying to me. I just assume it's all the time, but just be honest. But giving people permission to be honest helps that. But know what triggers you as a leader, right? But also know how to identify emotion in other people and don't engage when emotions are present. You as a leader, you should mainly communicate from nurturing parent or adult. Those are the only two really productive areas as a leader that we should be communicating from, right? Nurturing parent being, oh, that's okay. We can keep trying. We're going to do this together. I'm so sorry that happened. And then the adult, unemotional, fact-based kind of thing.
So I think one of the biggest things to highlight in this is that the emotional states you find yourself in that are unproductive, you can and should map, like you said, what are your triggers? What do you value most? What are the things that put you in that state? But the real challenge is we're in one. Now what? Because that's where you get stuck. You pick up the phone. You're going to call a prospect. You pick the phone. You're going to call an employee. You're going to talk to your partner. You're in the middle of the day, and you're going to talk to your spouse. And before you go into this really critical meeting, and without planning, without any expectation, you're in an emotional state that matters. Your most important client is mad at you about something you didn't expect. There's something going on at the house that's emotionally charged, and now you're in a state. And so, what's your advice to people to once that sort of like, I don't know what's up, but I do know something's up. What's the next step you do to get yourself to a more productive place?
Oh, it's a great question. So the way to think about it is fix the person before you can fix the problem. So if I have an emotionally charged person, and I have known a few in my life that they just couldn't control their emotion. They just couldn't help themselves. And so what you begin
I'm right
to
here,
identify,
man. You can just talk to me as though I'm right here.
Might call you the wrong name. But no, you have to fix the person before you can fix the problem. What does that mean? That means that when they're emotionally charged, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, you have to deal with that first. So that means being nurturing parent. That means creating space or time, right? I might not be capable of calming you down, which, by the way, telling people to calm down is not a remedy for getting people to calm down.
Right. That's why I yell it really loud, because otherwise they don't hear it.
Calm down.
Yeah, that's my plan A.
We have a joke in our family because apparently I used to say calm down a lot. That we now have the calm down glasses, and which is a joke. We don't literally have those, but we say, "Oh my God, do I need to get the calm down glasses for you?"
That's right.
But yeah, you have to fix the person first. So you have to get them to calm their emotion, and whenever the emotions have subsided, then you can deal with the problem. But yeah, fix the person, then the problem.
And so
Mark,
I'm hearing
we got like 45 seconds.
Yeah. So let's land the plane here with it. We're out of time. So I'm hearing the kind of go-to is seek to way to nurture. If you can't get into an adult situation, the facts are out of, if emotion is in play, facts are not the primary currency. You're probably going to lean towards some form of nurture in almost any scenario.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, awesome, man. We're out of time for this. I think we should continue this topic, if not next time, ongoing. There's a lot to unpack here and test out. So I'm grateful to kind of at least crack open the nut a little bit and see a little bit what's inside, and we can do more with this. So until then, we'll see you next time, and just be aware of your emotional state, and maybe look inward and see if you can nurture a situation to the next level and calm the person you're talking to as a human being, much more so than trying to fix the issue. We will see you next week on Your Plan to Win with Mark and Brad. We'll see you then.